Hello, welcome back or welcome to the Movies for Breakfast podcast. I realize I never say my name in the intros, but as it turns out, it does seem like people who are not my mom or my friends are listening. And so I should probably introduce myself. So I'm Christy. I'm your host. That's all you need to know about me for now. All right. Last episode we did K-pop Demon Hunters. Maybe my favorite episode yet to record. It was so much fun. And since then I've seen The Naked Gun last week with Pamela Anderson and Liam Neeson, and it was fun and it was fine, and I do have things to say about it. I just wasn't sure if I have a full episode of things to say about it or if it would be the most valuable, so I'm prioritizing the two other movies I saw since then because I think they're more interesting. Today is Monday, August 11th. Yesterday, Sunday, I did another Sunday double feature, which is something I've been doing lately and I love, and I saw Eddington, and then I saw The Phoenician Scheme, only to realize later that The Phoenician Scheme is already streaming and I could have seen that at home and paid to see something else, but it's fine. Today, we're going to talk about Eddington. I want to give The Phoenician Scheme a second watch now that I know that it's on streaming, so I can give more specific scene and shot breakdowns. So for Eddington, I'm going to give a spoiler-free review at the top, give my rating, and then I'll warn about spoilers in the audio and in the episode description. Then I'm going to go through the plot, the characters, and analysis. So if you haven't seen the movie and you don't plan on it or you don't care about spoilers, then this episode will still be entertaining. You don't have to have seen the movie to appreciate the episode. Okay? Also, before I get into the episode, on the topic of it seems like people who I don't know are actually listening to this podcast, which is cool, please give it a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify because nobody can see how many viewers a podcast has, and it doesn't seem legit if someone finds it and there's no ratings. So I hate to ask, but it would be nice. All right, so on Eddington, let me give my spoiler-free review. All right, so Eddington was released this summer, directed by Ari Aster. The only other movie of his that I've seen is Midsummer, and I had mixed feelings about that one, so I didn't have like a ton of expectations either way for his work going into Eddington. Our two main stars are Joaquin Phoenix and Pedro Pascal. Really mostly Joaquin Phoenix is the star. Eddington takes place during the very beginning of the COVID outbreak in this town called Eddington in New Mexico. Right off the bat, it's an interesting choice to cover the pandemic. It still feels like it was so recent, and it was kind of like, I don't know, it was really strange to see COVID not only be like mentioned in passing in media, which has happened so far, but be the focus of the media. Definitely an interesting and I think challenging choice. So I respect that. It explores a lot of the different kind of ideologies that were emerging more starkly at the time. I've gone back and forth on my rating because at times when I'm thinking about it and writing notes about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I hated this and I hated that, and I want to give it a worse rating. But then at other times I'm like, okay, maybe upon further reflection, I didn't fully give this thing credit, or I actually did like this choice they made. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. But when I say 3 out of 5 stars, I don't mean like, oh, I felt neutral, I felt lukewarm about it. I mean, there were some things that I felt were like 5 out of 5 stars. And then there were some things that I felt were like 2 out of 5 stars. And I'm averaging to 3 out of 5. Just know that there's a big standard deviation under that average. That's not me saying like I didn't have a lot of feelings about this movie. Whereas with Superman, I feel like I was more so giving it 3 out of 5 as like a, yeah. If you like a long movie, if you don't mind sitting in the theater for over 2 hours, it's a good one to go see. It was interesting to see it with the crowd's reaction. There was actually a pretty big audience, even for, it was noon on a Sunday, and there was like quite a crowd. I really like getting that instantaneous feedback from the people around me, like kind of laughing or gasping or even like whispering things. Like I love to hear what people are thinking in the moment, and then kind of like lurking outside the theater after and hearing like people's conversations. And I would say if you're gonna go see it, this is one where spoilers probably do matter more so than others. Like I don't always care about being spoiled, but with this movie there were definitely like plot twists where I wouldn't have wanted to know it going in. And so if you know you're gonna go see it and you don't want to be spoiled, just go see it first and then come listen to this episode. Or if like months go by and it's Oscar season and you need to know what happened and you still haven't seen it, you can come listen to this episode. There was some really interesting camera work, really interesting aesthetic choices that I enjoyed, and not just like aesthetically pleasing choices, but storytelling devices that I thought were fun and I appreciated. The script itself is what I take issue with in a lot of ways, but I don't have many criticisms about how the film was executed once we had the script, if that makes sense. And I often do have a lot of criticisms of that. So I think it was very well made. I think they probably had really great and talented people on set. And for that, I want to give it all of its credit and all of its flowers. The script and the actual like message of certain things is what I want to get into and kind of unpack a little bit more. I looked up the cinematographer after because I enjoyed their work so much. And it is Darius Honji, not sure. And he did the cinematography for Uncut Gems, Okja, and Mickey 17. I really liked Uncut Gems and Okja's movies. Mickey 17, not so much, but I love Bong Joon-ho. And so if he worked with the cinematographer twice, I think that's a good sign. So yeah, I would say go see it. If you feel like going to the movies, go see it, but it's not one that you have to go see. You can wait till streaming. So, spoiler warning, I'm going to start talking about details, all the juicy goss now. So like I said, this is set in a New Mexico town called Eddington during the initial outbreak of COVID. So this is spring 2020. I remember it well. I'm sure we all do. And so I definitely like kind of like felt my body physically tense up being thrust back into that moment. I really liked the New Mexico setting. It was very beautiful, lots of like deserty landscapes, and I liked that idea of it being a Western. I like Westerns, and I like the idea of it being kind of like the Wild West. Like there's an element of like shit can always go down in the desert. You know what I mean? Like cults are very disproportionately headquartered in the desert. Once you see it, you'll see it everywhere. Weird stuff happens in the desert and in the West. So we meet the sheriff, which is like such a classic Western character. And this is Joe Cross, played by Joaquin Phoenix. He's got salt and pepper hair, salt and pepper beard, these little wire-rimmed glasses on, and he has such a cunty little cowboy outfit on, like white denim with the little sheriff badge thing. Loved it. I have to say, loved his character design. He's having a hard time with the mask mandate. So there's a mask mandate statewide in New Mexico that you have to wear like medical masks because of COVID, obviously. And he's definitely one of the more kind of like libertarian Republican types who are like, you can't tell me what to do. I don't want to wear a mask. So he has a little showdown at the grocery store where they have people going in, spaced out, checking temperatures with the temperature gun, wearing their masks. And he's kind of like outraged on behalf of this older man in the town who is told he cannot go in without a mask. And the shop owner is kind of like, sheriff, like it's a mandate, like we have to enforce that. I don't know what to tell you. Most people don't seem to be having a problem with it. Like everyone in line and in the store is wearing a mask, and it's kind of that like dejected, resigned, quiet, isolated vibe that I feel like was mostly true in my experience living in cities at the time. But Sheriff Cross is really upset about it, and he like kind of digs his heels in. He insists on going into the store without a mask, and like just is not having any of being told what to do. A little crowd kind of gathers around, and this woman's like filming on her iPhone. iPhones and social media and phones are present so much throughout this movie, and that's one of the things I really liked about this movie. I think the way that they dealt with incorporating technology into film was a nice, somewhat fresh take, and I think they did a really good job at it. You can't cover COVID without covering social media and what was going on people's little screens all the time. Like that was such a part of our existence, even more than it is now, even more than it was before then. Like I read something at some point about how humans are kind of already cyborgs because we hardly function without the extension of technology. And I think this movie does an interesting job of incorporating how people are using their phones to interact with the world. So this woman's filming him in the grocery store, and he's being not belligerent, but stubborn and kind of an asshole about it. And then Pedro Pascal comes in. Pedro, so cute. Pedro Pascal is mayor of Eddington. So these two are rivals and clearly dislike each other like on sight. Pedro Pascal, what's the mayor's name? Mayor Ted Garcia. He's kind of a parody of a typical neoliberal Democrat type. Like he's handsome and respectful and has a kind of moral superiority air about him. But basically he's like super pro mask mandate. He's like, we just got to follow the rules. Like, I know this is a hard time, but we've got to do it. The sheriff hates him. I keep wanting to say just Joaquin Phoenix and Pedro Pascal. So Joaquin kind of storms out, I'm pretty sure. As Joaquin Phoenix is driving home, he has his iPhone like mounted on the type of thing where you have your Google Maps, but he turns the camera on and starts recording himself. And he is kind of just ranting about this mask mandate and how unfair it is and whatever. And he says, like, I get it. Like, I have asthma. It's really hard for me to breathe under these masks. The absurdity and the kind of backwardsness of him being like, I have asthma. I don't want to wear a mask. Perfect. Nailed it. Joe kind of impulsively announces that he's going to run for mayor against Ted. Joe gets home and his wife, played by Emma Stone, Louise, who we've been seeing Joe kind of frantically texting and her not replying. I didn't know if it was his wife or his daughter. Like, the texts weren't up on the screen long enough to actually really read anything, but you just got the vibe that he was like texting and not getting a response and was like anxiously checking in. She's like laying in bed and miserable and stuff. At this point, I still thought she was his daughter, because there's an older woman also at the house who starts kind of yelling at Joe about this thing, saying like, I told you the child can't handle it. So she's referring to Emma Stone as the child. So I thought it was their child. Turns out that's his wife, and the woman is his mother-in-law. So is Emma Stone's mom. Her name is Dawn. So the wife is Louise, the mother-in-law is Dawn, and they all live together in this house. For whatever reason, Louise is kind of like frail. You just get the sense that she's like maybe depressed, maybe dissociating. For whatever reason, this is like deeply upsetting to her that he would choose to run for mayor. I did think it was fair to be upset as his wife, to be like, you can't just like start running for mayor without talking to me first. But the way that it was like her mom yelling at him, definitely you're immediately like, okay, this is a weird dysfunctional dynamic and she is being infantilized. Meanwhile, I think we find out more about Ted at this point. Ted has a son named Eric, a teenage son, and his mother, Eric's mother, so Ted's wife, has like left them seemingly a while ago for some reason. We don't know why. So Ted is a single dad with his teenage son, Eric. Eric, as every child was at the time, is having a really hard time with COVID and the lockdowns. He misses his friends. He wants to go out. But Ted is like, you can't be seen at a super spreader party when I'm running for mayor telling everyone they can't go out without a mask or that there's a curfew, you know? Like, it's hypocritical if my son is out there. You can see that Ted is much wealthier than Joe. He has this like really, really nice ranch type of house. We see his mask slip a little bit. Like, he's definitely not actually that dedicated to the cause of preventing COVID spreading. Obviously, like, he's a politician. He's very worried about the optics of it. And honestly, this was very real too. I feel like there were so many situations, because I was a junior in college, spring 2020, and we got sent home right away, and we didn't get back until fall of 2021, so my senior year. And we were living off campus, and there was still so much like surveillance and unfairness around who got away with like very blatantly, you know, shirking mandates and gathering, and who didn't get away with even the slightest like overstep. So there was a lot of, I feel like, a lot of co-policing, a lot of people policing each other and looking at each other sideways of like who's following the rules the best and who's not. And you kind of lost the plot of like, what is the ultimate goal here? Like, why are we doing this? And is it fair that any of us have to deal with this in this way? No, it sucks, but like, we do have to do it. I just feel like we definitely lost that plot, and it turned into kind of a moral competition thing of who was the best at not spreading COVID. And then to the point where like, if you tested positive for COVID, it was so embarrassing to have to tell people, and you felt so bad being like, hey guys, like, I'm so sorry I tested positive. And you feel like you've done something wrong, or it's like exposing you for having been exposed, literally. When in reality, it's like, hey, it was a pandemic. quite literally everybody got COVID at some point. It felt like you were bad, like you had snuck out and done something bad, even if you didn't and you just got COVID because it was a pandemic and it happened, you know? Joe is launching his campaign now, his makeshift last minute campaign, with the help of the seemingly only other 2 police officers in the town. So Joe is the sheriff. Then there's 2 police officers. One of them is Guy. I thought it was funny his name was Guy because at first when Joe comes in and he like says something to Guy, I thought he like didn't know his name. I thought he was just an asshole and he was like, you, Guy. But we have Guy, who is white, very typical kind of like, he looks like a guy from your high school who joined the military. Do you know what I mean? Like he kind of had like short hair and blonde stubble. I feel like I don't need to say anything more. And then the other one, his name is Michael. He's black. He is kind of like seemingly the most normal of the 3. They're like definitely a weird bunch. They have like weird vibes. Joe, Guy, and Michael, 3 musketeers. He's like, you guys need to help me. This is campaign HQ now. Let's get to work. And they like roll out a big whiteboard and start writing like slogan ideas on it, and it's like the dumbest shit you've ever heard. I think the vibe you get is that Joe is probably generally like a nice person and an okay boss. Like he's not nasty, he's not abusive, but he's also like quite immature, selfish, and self-centered. So when he decides to run for mayor and then enlists the other 2 cops to help him run his campaign, he's very much like, yeah, I'm gonna run for mayor and you guys are gonna help me and I'm not gonna tell my wife, you know? So like, yeah, he's kind of an asshole. He doesn't have ill intention, it's just that all he really thinks about is himself. Meanwhile, Ted's campaign for mayor is centered on like modernizing Eddington into a tech hub and bringing in revenue and jobs to the town in that way. So he's working with these very expensive corporate data people to build a huge data center in town. He's having these press conferences with the media on Zoom where he's talking about building this data center, whatever, and how it's going to be so great for Eddington. And there's this one reporter, she's like, but what about all the water that the data center consumes and all the energy? Like, we're in a historic drought right now. And Pedro Pascal is like incensed by this question, which seems like a very reasonable question, a very reasonable objection to raise to the data center plan. But he's like messaging his campaign manager, whoever on the side, being like, can we shut this bitch up? Like, what? like this is so annoying. Ugh. We saw glimpses before in the way he was talking to his son that he like doesn't really give a fuck and he's fake, but this is really where his mask like fully slips and you're like, okay, yeah, he's a politician for sure. After Joe has announced that he's gonna run for mayor, Joe and Ted have this sort of weird confrontation in town where I think Joe is at the police station and Ted like waves to him from across the street outside to like come outside and talk. And so Joe like crosses the street to meet Ted, and Joe is standing on the edge of the street, like on the white line in front of the curb, and Ted is standing on the sidewalk in front of him. For some reason, this blocking and framing was so notable to me. It was like awkward, and it definitely had the vibe of like a showdown. Like, you know how in Westerns they have the Mexican showdown, like the classic where, you know, the 2 cowboys or whatever have their pistols at their hip and they're circling each other and then they have to be quicker on the draw and shoot each other or whatever. This had that kind of vibe of like, why are you guys just like standing there across from each other looking at each other, you know? And I also think it was interesting that Ted was standing on like a elevated surface. Pedro Pascal is clearly shorter than Joaquin Phoenix, and so that kind of evened their heights out. If we really want to give them a lot of credit, I would say that's because Ted has all of the money and resources and backing and education that Joe does not have, so it's not really a fair fight. But Ted mentioned something weird in this conversation where he's like, do you hate me? Like, do you have it out for me? Are you still upset with me about this thing that, you know, I won't mention this person's name, but I think you might still be upset with me about? And Joe is like, no, I don't care. Whatever, I don't care. Obviously he cares. But obviously Ted is also being an asshole and kind of like trying to provoke him. And he's like, all right, well, that would help me understand like why you're doing this, why you're running against me. So they have some historic beef. And I think they also are kind of foils to each other of what masculinity is. I think they represent two different paths that men can take in our social climate, in our political climate. And one of them is like fake woke, basically, very performatively liberal, not even leftist, but very performatively liberal, but actually just as misogynistic as everybody else and just as, you know, racist. At some point, like the three cops are reviewing Ted's campaign. They're looking at Ted's campaign video, and in this campaign video, there's like all of these different people of color in Eddington, like walking around and like shaking hands with the mayor. And Joe is like, where did he find all of these black women? Like, did he fly them in from out of town? Because clearly he's like using tokenism and trying to virtue signal that he cares about racial inequity and all this stuff without actually even having to say it, just like kind of implying it via casting in his campaign video. I think that's very true to like Democrat behavior, very much Democrat mayor from some town in USA. So one of them asks like, what has he even done for racial justice? Like he hasn't done anything. And one of them is like, well, he's Hispanic. So the theater laughed. We giggled. I giggled. I thought that was funny. Identity politics are not enough. Being a woman, being Hispanic, being black, being a woman of color, being gay, that doesn't mean that you by default represent the interests of those groups of people. And those groups of people don't necessarily have one common set of interests. Durr. It's like basic. It's like obvious. Then the Sheriff Joe is on the other side of that coin, where his performance of masculinity, I feel like, is very tied to this patriotism, this libertarianism, this idea of like what a white American man is. And to him, it's someone who doesn't have to do anything except for what they want. The most important thing in the world is doing whatever you want. That's the concept of freedom that he cares about. He's also the one with the firearms. He's also the one with the gun. And as far as we know, Ted doesn't have a gun. Like maybe he has one at home, but do you know what I mean? Like Ted is in like a Patagonia vest and hunter boots. And then Joe is in this like cowboy sheriff outfit and has a gun strapped on his waist. So they hate each other, but ultimately they're not actually that different. They're both putting on a mask and a performance of what they think manliness is, just in different ways. So now a few different things start kind of boiling up. Joe has repeatedly tried to reconnect with his wife, and she's just not having it. Like, she's totally icing him out. That's Louise, played by Emma Stone. And one night, he like has begged her. He's like, please, can we do dinner tonight? Like, let's just talk. I miss you, whatever. You do kind of feel bad for him because she's so like, definitely they don't have a normal relationship or any kind of communication. But you're also just like, how did you guys get married? Like, what is the situation here? Because it seems like you hardly know each other, and why are you so much older than her? You know, so it's like you want to feel sympathetic towards him, kind of, but you're also like, there's a reason she's like this. There's a reason she doesn't like you or want to talk to you or trust you, you know? But she agrees, dinner tonight, yeah, whatever, like, leave me alone. He makes this whole nice fancy dinner. He like sets the table, puts out candles, he makes a salad. He's like watching a YouTube video of like a cooking tutorial, and I have to admit that kind of made me sad. I thought that was sweet. And again, it was like a nice little moment of how our iPhones are just part of everything now. And he's like waiting at the table. He like set the table nicely outside. He's waiting at the table, and she obviously doesn't show up, and he like falls asleep at the table. And then hours later, she comes home with her mom, Austin Butler, and this random other couple. So, not great. I do like Austin Butler. I think Austin Butler is a good actor. He's good looking in the way that like works on screen. You know what I mean? Like if he were in K-pop, he'd be a good visual. Speaking of K-pop. Anyway, and you know when Austin Butler shows up with your wife, it's like, you know, it's not looking great for you and your marriage. especially when she's like giggling and kind of looking at him. And she's like, oh shit, like, sorry, husband, like, we got carried away, whatever. So weird. You're just like, what the fuck is going on that you and your mom and this random guy and this random couple, like, what is going on? You know, like, there's just clearly very weird social dynamics going on. I've never felt so uncomfortable. He is kind of like awkwardly strong-armed into being like, okay, like, have a seat, like, come sit, whatever. They were at some lecture together. I don't know, some lecture about pedophilia. And before this, when Joe was kind of trying to figure out what was going on with his wife, he found her laptop open at home, and it was like tabs and tabs open of this. She had clearly like doom scrolled and gone down this conspiracy spiral about pedophilia and child trafficking rings and stuff, and like not like real news. So she is socially isolated, mentally ill. Very reasonable to me that she would go down a conspiracy rabbit hole. Austin Butler's character is Vernon Jefferson Peake. Such a silly name, but like it made sense. He has kind of like long shoulder length hair, has like hippie vibes. Insufferable. Like, if my wife brought that man home, I would freak out. So Joe is really doing everything he can here to like keep it together and not be super awkward, but these people are like incredibly audacious and rude. Austin Butler is definitely doing some weird posturing and being like super egregiously audacious about what he feels comfortable doing in this man's home. He kind of just like walks in to get himself a drink of water, and he's like looking at all of the art and stuff around. So Emma Stone, Louise, the wife, she like makes dolls. She makes these like really creepy, terrifying little dolls and like weird childlike art. I didn't hate this. I thought this was kind of interesting. It's like she feels like an adult child, which was weird because it reminded me of Poor Things and her role in that too. But you get the sense that there's like something traumatic in her past. And so when Vernon at the table starts talking about his story, it feels very rehearsed story, very much like a missionary, the way that they hold eye contact and the tone of voice to get you to listen. And he's telling the story of how his father sold him to this like child sex trafficking ring when he was 10 or something. But the way he tells it is like really strange. I felt really weird about this. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I felt like, what was the point here? Because especially in a moment of time where Diddy's trial has been front and center culturally, and like pedophilia and child sex trafficking is very real. I understand it's also true that there's lots of conspiracy theorists around that and like unhelpful, wrong ideas about who is perpetrating it and how to stop it. But at the same time, like, yeah, it is real. So it was just weird to see this guy like be a villain and tell this story that like really felt like he was lying. It just felt like he was lying or exaggerating or like kind of relishing it in a way that like a survivor wouldn't. But then I am judging myself for having those thoughts, you know, because it's like, whatever. Joe is kind of like, what the fuck? And he's like prodding him a little bit with questions, like very gently, but Austin Butler's character is like very defensive. While he's telling this story though, Louise is looking at him like he hung the moon and the stars. Like, she is enamored by him. She's clearly like has a crush on him and thinks he's like a genius, you know? So tough watch for Joe, for sure. Louise says something that kind of suggests that she has probably been abused, which makes sense with everything else we see about her, with her dolls and her art and her mental illness, her weird codependency with her mom, her much older husband. Like, it all, you know, it all makes sense that maybe she would have a childhood trauma, an abusive childhood. And when she says something about it, her mom gets really defensive and is like, oh yeah, sure, like who would have abused you? Like something awful. So yeah, it becomes pretty clear that probably Louise's dad, who we don't know, or another close adult in the family, sexually abused Louise, and her mom covered it up, swept it under the rug, denies that it ever happened. Sad, but true. Like, this happens a lot. Usually there are adults who know that an abuser has been abusing children and who don't do anything about it. So you feel that Louise is kind of a victim in all of this. Like, she's been emotionally abandoned by her mom, in the sense that, like, her mom has not protected her, denies her reality, gaslights her. She's been abused. Her husband is this, like, weird older man who she seems to have no warmth or affection for, no trust with, no love for. Her mom is very involved in that relationship. And so she fell down this online rabbit hole, again, with the, like, social media and internet being so present in people's lives. She fell down this rabbit hole. She was especially vulnerable, being isolated during COVID, and went to some lecture with this guy, Vernon, about pedophilia because she feels she's found some kind of community and validation in that. And it turns out that he's like hot Austin Butler, and now she's in love with him. And he has cult leader energy for sure. I mentioned this earlier, but I don't know if I cut it out, that like cults are often headquartered in the desert. Deserts are culty. Resources are scarce. I mean, quite literally in this movie, we know that there's a drought. When resources are scarce and conditions are harsh, cults can flourish because it's very easy to consolidate power and control the distribution of resources. And then on a spiritual level, I just also feel like the desert, I don't know, it's like associated with hallucinations, like seeing mirages when you are dehydrated, tripping on shrooms in the desert. Like, I just associate the desert with weird psychological experiences. So, bad times at the Cross household. Meanwhile, Ted Garcia, the mayor, his son Eric is still sneaking out to see his friends. So he's sneaking out to see his friends, and he has this friend, Brian, just like another random kid, like this white kid from town, who has a crush on this girl, Sarah, this white girl from town, who is a very like politically active leftist advocate girl, right? She is a caricature of a social justice warrior in the derogatory sense of the term. Super morally superior, very self-deprecating about her entire existence in a way that is so like self-centered and egotistical, you know, like the constant like, I understand, I know I'm privileged, I know I'm white, and I know that's horrible and so bad and blah blah blah. This is one of the portrayals that I found a little bit frustrating in the movie, because I understood, and I found some of the digs at, you know, the performative white activism in Black Lives Matter. I found some of those digs like super valid and funny. But it was frustrating for me to see Ari Aster do this thing where it's like, see, everybody's ridiculous and hypocritical and bad, you know, in the sense that everyone was representing like a kind of section of society or a movement of society at the time, you know. And it was a little bit like, well, that's not really what the Black Lives Matter movement was. Like, that's, you know, that it was like much bigger than that. So she's like kind of ridiculous, but she's very smart, and the boys love her. And so they both decide to get really into Black Lives Matter to get closer to her. So very disingenuous intentions, but they're like, yeah, totally, let's go to the protest. You're hot. But the Black Lives Matter movement in this like small town in New Mexico is really just like a group of 15 teenagers, it seems like. And they have these protests with signs, and everyone's like posting about it on social media. It turns out that Sarah is somehow romantically involved with Michael, one of the cops, and she is much younger. So this was another situation where I'm kind of like, well, why is everybody equally bad? Like, it feels like he was set up to be the voice of reason in the police station because he was the only black cop, and the other two are like clearly prime targets for white nationalism. Yeah, but instead of him being like a voice of reason or being like a totally sympathetic character, you're also like, wait, is he creepy? Like, why is he involved with this much younger girl, you know? So I don't know. At some point I was kind of like, well, what's the point? Like, okay, I guess he sucks too, you know? But she tries to convince him to join the movement, and I felt very uncomfortable with the way this like little white girl was talking to a grown black man, like, Michael, you should be here with us. Like, I know I've never experienced racism, but you have. And they are making fun of her. Like, you're meant to feel uncomfortable. So I did feel uncomfortable. But he's not going to join their cause. And he is sticking with the police for now. But you can see that when they're discussing it in the station, or when they, you know, interact with the protesters, he's not as gung-ho as Joe and Guy about, like, this is ridiculous, like, this is a violent movement. He's kind of like, you know, staying quiet a little bit about it, and Guy is getting weird and racist towards him, like these little microaggressions of like, do you understand this? Like, do you understand why they're doing this? And very much being like, you're black, thoughts? And Michael's like, what? I don't know what you want me to say. You know, he's in a very uncomfortable position. Joe is spiraling even more now. He's like unstable when we meet him, and then just continues spiraling. And after this confrontation with Austin Butler and his wife, after he like tried this last ditch effort to make dinner and talk to his wife, he's really upset. He's also really upset at the implication she made that she had been sexually abused. And I guess he didn't pick up on, or he chooses subconsciously not to pick up on, the fact that she was talking about her father. And he asks her if it was Ted. Because this beef between Joe and Ted apparently is that the rumor is that Ted was dating Louise, or seeing Louise when she was much younger, and got her pregnant and left her. And you see him talking to his campaign team about this, and he's like, it's not true, like, we weren't together, I would have never done that. But like, he's lying for sure. Like, he's being really weird and shady about it, and you're like, okay, you definitely had sex with that young woman, you know what I mean? Yeah. But Joe is upset about it. I don't think he's upset about it because he's so against like statutory rape. I think he's upset about it because men have this tendency to make rape about themselves and about like honor, and that if you have sexually assaulted a woman who they feel is their property in some way, it's an insult to them personally. And so it's not about the survivor, it's not about empathy with the survivor, and it's not really about the suffering of the survivor, it's about the male ego. And that's definitely where Joe falls on this. I don't know if he even really believes this deep down, but he's like losing it already. He goes online the next day, he's giving like this campaign speech at a local restaurant, and he has Guy set up the iPhone and the little ring light recording his speech. He kind of randomly blurts out that he can no longer stay silent about this because Ted Garcia is dangerous. Ted Garcia, when he was such and such age and Louise was blah, 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 underage, he got her pregnant, forced her to have an abortion, and then left her. So, pretty intense allegation. And he's like, we have to call it what it is. It's rape, statutory rape. And like I said, like, it's just, it's very infuriating because he obviously doesn't give a fuck about statutory rape. He's the same age as Ted, and he's with Louise. And it's like, well, when did you get together with her? You know, like, had she just turned 18 so then it was okay? Weird vibes. But the crowd is clearly kind of like, what? And it seems like most of them didn't go for his campaign speech. Like, they were just eating dinner, and he was like, thanks for coming. But Guy is like, are you sure you want to post that? And Joe is like, yeah, post it. So he posts it, and when he gets home, he rolls up in his car, and it's nighttime, and like the headlights turn into the driveway, and she's standing there with her luggage, very much looking like a ghost. And Emma Stone is like, has a deep side part ginger hair, no makeup, almost like negative makeup, like when they put makeup on a beautiful actress to make her look kind of weird looking, is what it felt like. No offense to Emma Stone if it really was no makeup, but I'm convinced they like tried to make her look weird. It is actually kind of a jump scare. And he's like, Louise, please, like, Louise, no. And she just like walks down the driveway, and then this big truck pulls in, and it's Austin Butler, and she gets in the truck with him and drives away. So like I said, if your wife shows up to dinner 2 hours late with Austin Butler, call a lawyer, because I think it's over. So bad. And then she releases a video online like the next day where she says that she was abused, but it was not by Ted Garcia, and that her husband was lying, basically. So obviously that's also bad for Joe. So now Joe is like humiliated, and throughout the campaign he's been like kind of digging at Ted for his wife having left him, which is also just like fucked and weird, and like we don't know why his wife left, but he's a single dad and he has like a teenage son at home, and so to be like, yeah, and you're a loser, your wife left, is definitely an interesting choice, definitely a low blow. But now his wife left him, so by his own logic, now he's a loser. You know what I mean? And I think this is another example of the weird like masculinity standoff between the two of them, where Louise represents to Joe that he is a worthy man, like that he got the girl, whether or not their relationship has any kind of love or warmth in it. It gives him this feeling that he won against Ted. It's this very male ego weird thing of like, you care more about what this other man thinks about your wife than you do about your wife, you know? So then Ted is having a very hypocritical campaign fundraiser party at his house. It's like you can hear the music from the driveway, and it's a long driveway in a big house, but they're doing like temperature gun checks at the door. And as soon as you walk in, you see people standing like 2 feet apart with their mask under their nose, like holding a flute of champagne. This was very real, again, to COVID, like situations where it's a social event that like ostensibly is following the rules and being responsible, but people are so desperate to socialize and feel normal that those masks are coming off and people are standing close together. And it's just like, if there's food and drink there, what did you expect, you know? But who pulls up but Joe Cross in his vehicle, which throughout the movie, like they keep adding campaign signs to his truck to the point of like absolute absurdity, which I loved. One of them that is in like so many shots right on the front of the truck just says, "You're being manipulated." YOUR being manipulated. And the truck kind of like represents his mental state. The armor that he's putting on when he feels like he's less of a man is these extremist ideas. Joe rolls up to this party pissed off because they got a noise complaint that it was too loud. And Michael was like, we should probably not do anything, right? Like, it's too sensitive and like personal. Joe's gonna do something. So Joe rolls up, and what is blasting from the party so loud you can hear it from the driveway? Firework by Katy Perry. What a funny choice. I was thinking about like why, like what do you mean? And I feel like it's just that like it's very much recession pop. Like Katy Perry to me represents like a very fake sheen of like American joy over ugly times. Like that's what Katy Perry is. Okay, so firework is blasting and it's like so loud and obnoxious. And as Joe kind of storms into this party, he just follows the sound up to where the speaker is, walks right past Ted, who's like, man, what are you doing here? And Joe just goes and like turns the volume off on the like DJ thing. It was so loud, and I'm like very sensitive to noise, and sometimes in movie theaters like I really have a bad time with sound mixing. In general, in this movie, I thought they did a brilliant job with the sound mixing. There were so many situations where they used like the stereo audio and would have someone's voice only coming from one side, increasingly throughout the movie from Joe's point of view, which made you feel like as disoriented and disheveled as he increasingly feels throughout the movie. Also, from the very start of the movie, before we even learn that he has asthma, like from the very, very start, you hear his breathing. You can hear my breathing too, because I'm always stuffed up. But you can hear him breathing, and you can hear, oh my gosh, it really did feel like that feeling of when you had a mask on all the time and like you're all sweaty and can't breathe and you're claustrophobic, and it's like very much this like claustrophobic and constantly icky feeling of COVID times. So in general, I really like the sound mixing. We hear Joe wheezing a lot more throughout the movie, like his asthma is getting worse, and you also kind of assume he probably has COVID. There were a lot of interesting moments of silence, and I know that because I kept having to stop with my popcorn in my mouth and not chew for a second because it would suddenly go silent and the whole theater was silent, and I was like, oh. But yeah, firework in this scene was so fucking loud. I was kind of losing my mind. Like I was genuinely so uncomfortable with how loud it was, and as much as I hated that, I think it was perfect because it shows, again, from Joe's perspective, how overwhelmed he is. Like he's really like on the brink here. Like firework is his like final straw where he's just like, you have to shut the music off. And he doesn't say anything. He doesn't say anything about the noise complaint. He just like marches in and turns it off. And then he starts walking away. And my thought was like, dude, like, you know, he's just gonna turn the music back on. But he walks away for like 30 seconds before you hear the music like immediately come back on full volume. And then he turns around and walks back and turns it off again. and then Ted turns it on again, and then Joe turns it off again, like very childish, kind of back and forth. It felt like a Step Brothers moment a little bit. Like it was a sillier moment. But then Ted slaps Joe across the face. I was kind of shook. Like the whole theater was like, oh. And Joe is like clearly taken aback too, and he just kind of stands there, and then Ted slaps him again. And this is in front of like the whole party, the whole campaign, everything. And it was like an open hand face slap. He like slapped him across the face. I'm always going to bring up patriarchy and masculinity, okay? And this felt like another moment where like a man, I'm doing air quotes, would have punched him in the face. Like that is like manly violence. But an open hand slap, especially in film, is very feminine. Like that's like John Tucker Must Die, your girlfriend just found out you're cheating on her. Not a fight between men. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like Ted is antagonizing Joe, and he's not even doing it in the way that Joe would respect. Like a slap across the face just feels very demeaning. A slap across the face is like you're being disciplined, you're being chewed out by your girlfriend. It's not like a rival fight. Joe doesn't say anything and Joe doesn't fight back. He just turns around and walks away. And I was like, oh, fuck. Like his lack of reaction was very scary. I thought he was going to turn around and shoot Ted right there in front of everyone. I was like, he has a gun, man. Like, don't slap a slightly crazy man with a gun. But he just storms off. And as he's driving away, the like top, there's like a set of signs mounted on the roof of his car, and they get knocked off like by a tree branch as he's driving away. And that felt very like, oh, that was his head. Like that was his sanity falling off. The top part of his truck falling off was the rest of his sanity going. And sure enough, this is the beginning of the end. From here on, we get chaos. Some of it I really liked, and some of it was annoying to me. It's nighttime in town, and Joe is walking around, and Joe sees that like one of the bars in town has been broken into. The glass is smashed, and there's this homeless guy drinking liquor from behind the bar in there, and he has been like around town in a lot of scenes so far. Like he's clearly like the neighborhood guy that like people know, and he's clearly like on drugs or drunk, definitely not mentally well, but he's harmless. Like the kids, the Black Lives Matter kids, have like encounters with him where they're just like, come on, man, like, you know, he's not violent. And Joe walks into the bar and is just kind of watching him for a minute, and this guy is like rambling incoherently to himself and smashing bottles. He's something that Joe cannot control, and that Joe feels is wrong with the world and wrong with his town. He shoots the guy. He pulls out his gun and literally just bang, bang, shoots the guy dead. The whole theater gasped at this point. We were all like dead silent. And then he just very calmly, no reaction, gets the body, puts it in a bag, cleans up the crime scene or whatever, and dumps the body in a river. This use of gun violence when he feels that his masculinity and his ego has been wounded so badly, I think is very true. It was interesting because Joaquin Phoenix was criticized a lot for his role in The Joker for being overly sympathetic to perpetrators of gun violence who are often white men who feel wronged by society, and in some ways like excusing that behavior. And it did feel a little bit incel adjacent, I will say. So it was interesting in this because I feel that this was a better example, maybe not perfect, but this was a better example of showing a man's descent into madness and violence, where you can see he's responsible for his own actions. You don't feel that there is an excuse for his behavior, and you don't really feel bad for him. Like once he does, or at least I didn't, once he shot this guy, I no longer felt bad for him. And I just felt like, oh, okay, you are proving everyone's point about cops. And that was the other irony of it, that this whole time they've been like, these kids are like, think we're so awful, but we're literally just the nice guys in town who are keeping everyone safe. And, you know, okay, there's a few bad cops, but nobody hates bad cops more than good cops, you know. And then he just like shoots this guy for no reason, kills him and disposes of the body, and you're like, oh, okay, so yeah, this is exactly what everyone has been saying. Like, you should not be operating with immunity and a weapon. Anyway, you understand why he's gone crazy, but you're also like, well, he is a bad guy and he did not have values in the first place. Okay, cut to Ted's house the next day or later that night or something. And Ted is sitting in their very nice, very fancy living room. And he sees this tote bag on the counter. It's like a black slouchy tote bag with pins all over it. It's definitely that girl, Sarah's, the activist girl who his son Eric and his friend Brian have been hanging out with and have a crush on. And Eric has been maybe hooking up with her. He like texted a picture of him kissing Sarah to Brian, his friend, like a weird like selfie of them kissing, which is such weird boy behavior, but like of course. And Brian is jealous because he likes Sarah. So he Instagram DMs that picture to Sarah's ex, alleged ex, Michael, the cop. That's how we know that Eric and Sarah are kind of a thing now. Like Eric won out against Brian, I guess. But Ted sees the bag and he's like, Eric, I told you, like, you can't have people over. Like, you can't have that girl over, which of course is like so annoying because he just threw this huge party. But okay. Eric's like, what purse? Like, I don't know. And Eric kind of comes walking out to see what his dad's talking about. We cut back to Ted and he gets shot. A bullet comes through the window behind him, through the like big armchair he's sitting on, and through his chest. So like from back to front, we just see like a bullet hole come out of his chest and like shoot him like right in the heart. And as Eric walks out and sees his dad dead and he's just kind of standing there stunned, he gets shot too and killed. And then we cut outside, and who is looking through their scope but Joe. So Joe killed Ted and his son Eric with like a sniper from outside. And then he just very calmly goes inside and again, like he did with the homeless man, starts like cleaning up the crime scene. Before he comes inside, he takes up the shell casings from the sniper from outside to hide that evidence. And then he comes inside, he's cleaning up, and he takes a can of spray paint and starts spray painting something on the wall. And then we cut away. They start working on this investigation, and Joe is acting like he has no idea what happened at the crime scene the next day. It's him, Guy, and Michael at the crime scene like, what could have happened here? And where he had spray painted, it says, no justice, no peace. So he's trying to frame it as an Antifa terrorist attack, as there was at the time a lot of discussion of the Black Lives Matter movement being tied to, run by Antifa terrorists. So yeah, why would they kill Ted and not Joe? I don't know. They're like fucking up the crime scene investigation. Guy touches stuff without a glove on, then he's like, oopsie. A different police officer shows up, and he is from the Pueblo land, which is like adjacent to their county. I forget what their county is called, but this adjacent area is controlled by the Pueblo tribe, and because they found a shell casing on their land, they can be involved in the investigation, basically, which Joe is clearly shaken up by and was not aware of. This police officer, his name is Butterfly Jimenez. The actor's name is William Bello, and he was also in Killers of the Flower Moon. He's kind of like, hey guys, like, no, we actually have every right to investigate, and we're trying to help you, so like, don't be an asshole. I'm pretty sure it was Joe, and it was in the scene when he's like trying to get rid of Butterfly Jimenez, Officer Jimenez, and he says something like so racist about Native Americans. He's like, shouldn't you be dealing with your alcoholism at the casino or something? And I was kind of like, oh, Jesus Christ. And the people in the theater around me like laughed a little too hard at that, where I was like, wasn't that funny? You know, it felt a little bit like the kind of comedy that's just like the shock value of like saying the R word and being like, ha, what are you gonna do? I said it. Which also happened. Brian is like, there's a scene of Brian, Eric's friend, at dinner with his family going on and on about all the social justice stuff that he has absorbed from Sarah. And it's like nonsensical, self-flagellating nonsense. And nonsensical nonsense. Perfect. And he is going on and on. He finally like goes quiet, and his dad says like, are you R word? Blah, blah, blah. And everyone laughed at that too. And I was like, yeah, guys, I guess it's funny. I don't know. I don't find it funny. But Officer Jimenez doesn't seem to like really care that much. He's just like, okay, guys. But he also is like, he doesn't care that they're telling him to go away. He's like, I'm still gonna investigate. It was on our land. Joe was planning to just go with the Antifa terrorist framing thing for the murder. But the problem is that now that Officer Jimenez is involved and there's this other scrutiny on it, he's not sure that's good enough. And meanwhile, Guy is acting really weird around Michael now. He has increasingly made these microaggressive comments towards him as the racial tensions in the town have increased and as the Black Lives Matter protests have gotten more intense and like slightly physical with the cops, like truly like nothing that crazy, but they're like, there's a riot in the streets. Typical. Anyway, so Brian, the teenager who is friends with Eric and in love with Sarah, comes in to the police station and he's acting really weird and he's refusing to speak to anyone but Joe. Basically, he implies that he thinks Michael might have done it because he had sent that Instagram DM to Michael of Eric and Sarah kissing, which was like I said, like an insane thing for him to do anyway, but I guess he was jealous and vindictive. This is obviously like such a perfect satire on the kind of performative activism that he was doing, because he obviously didn't give a fuck about any of the social justice stuff that he was spewing to get closer to Sarah. He is so quick to decide that the only Black person that we've met in this town for sure did the murder, you know, over some like petty girl dispute with a teenage boy, which is like pretty obviously ridiculous, but not to these people because they are racist and it's like not that hard to activate that in them, you know, like at the smallest suggestion. Guy is like, yeah, I mean, Michael has been acting weird. You can see Joe barely wrestle with whether or not to throw Michael under the bus, which is really sad because like him and Michael are clearly pretty close. He was gonna promote Michael. He calls him Mikey. He was friends with Michael's dad. And clearly Michael has been like mistreated and overlooked at the police station and has said like, I haven't been promoted in 5 years or whatever. And like, I'm way overqualified. So he's like already being treated poorly and facing this like implicit racism at work, but it's been escalating and becoming more explicit. And then now, instead of promoting Michael, he is gonna frame him for murder. So pretty quickly, Joe and Guy handcuff Michael and put him in the holding cell in the police station, which is like awful and so sad. And Michael is like, guys, like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, are you serious right now? And he uses his one phone call and he calls his uncle and he's like, yeah, like I'm being held in this. I don't know why, but I mean, I know why, but like that, I almost cried. I was like so stressed out for him. And so I felt so betrayed on his behalf. And then also the fact that he called his uncle, I'm like, his father's clearly dead. Maybe he's not calling his mom because he doesn't want to devastate her. Maybe he's not close with his mom. Like he clearly like doesn't have a lot of people in his life. And Joe and Guy were supposed to be like his best friends. And they just like completely betrayed him. So once they put him in the cell, or like as they're putting him in the cell, Officer Jimenez comes in to the police station to drop off the evidence that he had collected at the crime scene. And he sees the whiteboard that still has out the slogan ideas. And this whiteboard has been like conspicuously out in this scene up until this point. Like I noticed that it was still out and I just thought it was kind of a cutesy callback because it was like a funny moment, the slogan ideas. But no, it actually is important because Joe has this very distinctive handwriting where he writes his E's kind of like a backwards 3, his capital E's. And so when he had spray painted no justice, no peace, his E's were like that. And Officer Jimenez had taken a picture of it and said something like at the crime scene about how they have handwriting experts that they were going to contact. But it didn't even take a handwriting expert. It just took his naked eye to notice this. And like he looked at the picture and looked at the whiteboard and you see him kind of have like a oh shit realization. He like runs out. And so I'm like, hell yeah, okay. It's going to be fine. Officer Jimenez is on it. We're going to figure this out. Guy and Joe are kind of distracted dealing with another protest, I think. And then when they get back to the police station, Michael has broken out, or Michael has been broken out. He's not in the cell anymore. And they're like, what the fuck? Oh my God. Okay. I don't remember how they tracked him down, honestly, but they find him like out in the desert. And basically he's been like kidnapped. He is gagged kind of and like tied up, and he's trying to tell Guy and Joe like don't come near me, they're gonna blah, 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 something, but you can't like really understand what he's saying, but he's clearly panicking and like trying to warn them to stay away. And they have their guns drawn at Michael, and they're approaching him, and they're like, why isn't he putting his hands up? Why isn't he getting down? Like, it's because he can't. There's this drone flying like high up above where they are, which is like super sus. Immediately you're like, what the fuck? Like, why? Who's recording this? Or what is that drone controlling? You know, like, drones are scary. But they walk towards Michael, and it sets off this huge explosion. They get like blown back. Guy has been killed. Guy's dead. He's like in half. He's like severed. This is where the gore kind of begins. I mean, already we had the 2 shootings, which were kind of gory, but this was like gross. And then Michael, he has not been like blown to bits, but like half of his face is burned up. And Joe, who is like invincible, finds Michael and looks at him and kind of like makes a decision not to try to save him. Like, he could have tried to save Michael and called an ambulance and all of this stuff, but he doesn't. He just leaves him there. And the explosion triggered like a fire. They had prepared a fire, whoever, that I don't think it said also no justice, no peace. Maybe it just said no justice. Maybe it just said no peace. This was like an actual terrorist attack. We don't understand who or like why in this moment. So in the theater, I'm sitting there going, Ari Aster, tell me that the plot is not a highly armed, highly trained private army mercenary group rolls into Eddington on behalf of Antifa. Like, please tell me that's not how this movie is going. In hindsight and like reading what other people think, the theory that I think is the most like obvious and reasonable, even though people are saying this is open to interpretation, but I kind of don't think it's open to interpretation that much. I think it's like very probable that they are hired by the company that wants to start the data center in town. Because there would be like billions of dollars potentially behind that. I'm going with that. And I think Ari Aster has this tendency to kind of be like, and another thing, and everything go to shit in this like very dramatic way, which I don't dislike. I think it felt true to the Western genre, like a slow build up and then a showdown. And I think it felt very Tarantino, who I have such mixed feelings about, but often deeply enjoy, especially in theaters. Like, it felt like The Hateful Eight when you finally get the battle scene at Minnie's haberdashery. And Midsommar was like this too. And I thought it suited that vibe, that cult vibe very well, of like, it's kind of like boiling a frog, where you slowly get more and more indoctrinated, entrenched. So it made sense there. My problem with the rest of the movie from here on out in Eddington is that there was already a story to be told that would have been really satisfying about what had happened so far. Like, we didn't need so much more shit to happen. I don't know. I found myself disappointed because once this started, I was like, okay, well, I guess everyone's gonna die. Like, you know, it felt like horror movie Final Girl vibes, where Joaquin Phoenix is the final girl. And you're like, wait, but I thought we were getting a murder mystery thing where Officer Jimenez was going to like figure, you know? So it was just, okay, let me just continue. From here on out, the antagonists are these mercenaries. And they're in like bulletproof vests and all black. Like they look very much the part of like the mercenaries in Uncharted or something. Guns for hire, basically. Joe Cross runs away. He gets in his car and drives away. We get this like chase scene through the desert. The mercenaries are chasing him and like trying to shoot him. And you get this like absolute comedy of him being invincible, where like the bullets just will not kill him. They will hit his glasses. They will bounce off his belt. They will bounce off of his gun. They will not kill him. Like, under a barrage of machine gun fire, he will not get shot. And I found that funny and kind of enjoyable. Like, it wasn't explicitly played for humor, but it was so absurd. And I feel like it was kind of like, if Joe represents a moral and intellectual rot in our society, you can't just shoot it dead, you know? Like, it's very hard to kill. Like, you just feel that he's this like blight on society that cannot be taken out. And they've chased him all the way back into town, to Eddington. And the town is like eerily quiet and flat and empty. Felt very true to an old Western town where you might have a final showdown. The town is always really important, and the setting is always really important in a Western for so many reasons. But I think in this movie, the final showdown happening like on the street in the middle of this quiet town in New Mexico was great. I don't know. I loved it. I loved that it was in public. I love that the battle was in the public sphere in society and not like in the home. I talked a lot about the meaning of private versus public and what the home represents in my Sorry Baby episode, but that movie deals with violence against women in private. This movie deals with men clashing egos and ideologies in public. So it made sense to me that this would happen like in the town square, you know? I mean, the movie is called Eddington. It's about Eddington. And Eddington is like a microcosm for America. He runs into a gun store in town. You see him like break into this building and it like pans out or zooms out, and then you see it's like, what it was called, like Gunther's Emporium, with like the gun in Gunther bold. Very cutesy. And he just comes bursting out with like, I don't know what it's called. Like I'm not really up on my weapons lexicon, but it's like the type of thing that's like, you know, like it's like a big, it's not a machine gun. It's like a cannon. It's like a machine hand cannon. Anyway, I don't know. At this point, we get some really interesting camera work. We are feeling super, super disoriented and stressed from Joe's POV, and we get the camera slowly circling him, and you start hearing sounds, like I mentioned earlier, sounds that were only playing on speakers on one side of the theater or another. So I was feeling like really freaked out. I genuinely kept thinking that someone was talking in the theater, but then I realized it was just something they were doing with the spatial audio, which was very cool. You keep thinking there's going to be a jump scare behind him, but there's no one there. It just keeps slowly circling him. So you feel so paranoid and tense. So you kind of understand when he starts just firing off indiscriminately, circling around and around, shooting. He can't even see what he's shooting at. He's just shooting around and around and like into these buildings. Like clearly he might kill innocent civilians. Suddenly he hits someone, but we look up and it turns out it's Butterfly. It's Officer Jimenez who was running towards him. And Officer Jimenez was, I think, trying to help him. Like he wasn't going to kill Joe, obviously. But yeah, he shot Jimenez in the knee and blew his entire like leg off from the knee down, and Jimenez like falls down. Gross. And also I was like, what the fuck? Like I wanted to see him solve this case. I wanted to see him crack this case, you know? I was really annoyed by that and disappointed. And then like almost immediately the mercenary guys shoot Officer Jimenez in the head too, and he dies. Meanwhile, Joe still has not been shot. He cannot be shot, which is like so insane. Joe is kind of like, oh no, oops, you know, like shit. But I mean, he's been on a murder streak. He's not too precious about the value of human lives around him. And finally, this like one mercenary who seems to be left in this showdown with Joe starts just running towards him with a knife, and he fully stabs Joe in the head with this big knife, like top of his skull, stabs through his skull. The whole theater was kind of like, ugh, like it was gross and violent and like shocking. First of all, I think he's dead, but he's not. Second of all, the screen kind of splits and the camera kind of becomes like a double exposure, sort of like if you get knocked in the head and you start seeing double, we start kind of seeing double through Joe's eyes. So that was really cool. He is saved by Brian, the teenage boy, Eric's friend. For some reason was out at night and saw this going on, and he also thinks that these are Antifa terrorists, basically. Yeah, so Brian shoots the guy who stabbed Joe, And he films the whole thing on his iPhone. He's like walking towards Joe with his iPhone like, I saved you, sheriff. Did you see that? I saved you. So Gen Z, so true to like bystander culture. I feel like I see so many videos on social media of someone in a crisis or like in a dangerous situation, and I'm just like, who is filming? Who pulled out their phone and started recording this? Like, you need to go help that person, you know? And it's very stressful, and all the comments will be like, why were you filming this? You should have helped that person. The first instinct is to make sure you are recording on your phone, because if you haven't gotten a video, did it even happen? You know, pics or it didn't happen. Pics or it didn't happen has been a thing since I was like in middle school, but now I feel like life is quite literally pics or it didn't happen. And I guess he does save Joe, because Joe's not dead after being stabbed in the head. Joe goes to the hospital, and you can hear the EMTs, like from Joe's perspective, take his temperature with a temperature gun, and he has a fever because he has COVID at this point. And they're like, we got to take him to triage, like, sorry, or like he has to go to like the quarantine unit and basically have delayed care. Meanwhile, he's been stabbed in the head, and they're like, well, I don't know, like he's gonna die, like he's not gonna make it. They don't give a fuck. And you have this sense of like horror from Joe's perspective of him being like, wait, no, I'm still alive, you know? All right, so now we cut to like a year later, and we get the resolution. We get all of our loose ends tied up, kind of. I'm still mad that this was our ending, and that instead of Jimenez figuring out what Joe did and cracking the case, this is what we got. Didn't love it, but okay. Brian has turned into a full-on like right-wing bro influencer, and he has like bought a house with his like wife. He has capitalized on this moment of him saving the sheriff by shooting the Antifa terrorist. It's especially miserable because his best friend supposedly was killed by these people. If he really believes that, it's still fucked up that he's capitalizing on it. People like praise him as a hero, whatever. He's probably like on Fox News or something. Meanwhile, Joe is seemingly paralyzed. He got elected mayor, probably like as a hero after this incident, and also because Ted died. So his plan worked in a way, but he is mayor, and Dawn, who remembers his mother-in-law, Louise's mother, is his caretaker, and she is kind of effectively mayor in his stead. So after Louise ran away with Vernon, Dawn stayed in Eddington. Then I was kind of confused, because I thought what we saw was this event where Dawn is announcing the opening of this new renewable energy center, and they have like windmills on the Pueblo land and solar and hydro, like all of this stuff, which is not the same as the data center that Ted was talking about creating. And it seemed like actually good, or at least not evil. Not that Dawn is a good person at all, but that like ultimately Eddington as a town ended up better off having Ted killed and Joe unable to really be mayor. But the Wikipedia plot summary says that it was the grand opening of the data center, which I just don't think it was. Let me know if I'm misremembering, because I am 99% sure that was not the opening of the data center. Anyway, we see Michael at this grand opening of whatever it was. So Michael survived, even though Joe did nothing to try to save him. But yeah, he obviously knew that Joe left him for dead. Accused him of a murder, which he knew he didn't commit, and which he may or may not have figured out that Joe committed, and then left him for dead. We see him doing shooting practice in his backyard, basically. And throughout the movie, they had done shooting practice as police officers, and Michael was like a really good shot. So he's looking pissed off and determined and doing shooting practice. And then we see him shooting, as in recording Joe on his iPhone at this event. And so you kind of are like, well, maybe he's going to kill Joe for revenge. Or maybe he feels that Joe has been punished enough by the universe. Joe and Dawn go back to this very nice, wealthy, beautiful house. So Dawn has enriched herself by this position of power. They have like a live-in nurse taking care of Joe, and we see the nurse like take Joe to use the toilet, and we get like a full frontal nudity shot of Joe being like sort of unceremoniously dragged onto the toilet. He like tries to elbow the caretaker, the nurse, off of him, and the nurse like smacks his hand away and then says like sorry and pats his head. And it's supposed to be funny, and it's supposed to be like satisfying to see Joe be degraded in this way. And also the full frontal nudity. First of all, I never want to see that in the movie theater, especially because it's always gross intentionally, and it's okay, whatever. But it was clearly, to me, like showing how totally emasculated he was, like having his limp dick out, needing help to use the toilet, was supposed to be like, see, like he thought he was asserting his masculinity and his ego, but really now look what he's become. And people giggled at this. I don't know, it really rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like this idea, and I don't like this idea of disablement being someone's comeuppance or being like the universe's revenge on someone, because I think that's like a harmful narrative that some people actually have about disability, that it happens for a reason or it's a punishment from God or whatever. And I really find that abhorrent. I don't like the use of disablement as like to be like, see, the worst possible thing happened to him, worse than death, you know? It's just icky to me. But I understand the point that they were trying to make. Ultimately, Joe is supposed to be the biggest loser in the situation and have the worst outcome. I just don't like how they chose to show it. I think it is kind of an unnecessary, degrading story to tell about physically disabled people who require help. But then Dawn and Joe are sitting in the living room, and Dawn is looking at her like iPad and gasps and shows Joe very like insensitively. She's like, look at this. And it's a video on the news of Vernon, who is Austin Butler, the like cult leader, giving some speech at some event. And who is sitting there is a pregnant Emma Stone. She's like sitting quietly, like rubbing her pregnant stomach in the way that like pregnant women do, of like, oh, I'm so pregnant and that's my stomach, you know? Obviously, this is like a torturous scene for Joe. He was already tortured by his wife not speaking to him, and then he was tortured by his wife bringing home a hot young man, and then he was tortured by his wife leaving with that man, and then he was tortured by his wife publicly denouncing him. And now he's seeing his wife pregnant with this man's child and publicly supporting him. And it was gross. It was weird. You definitely get the feeling that she's like, she has not like escaped her life of being controlled by her mother and being complacent in her marriage with Joe. She's just found another way to live under someone else's control. Actually, it's quite true and sad that people who have these like abusive and codependent relationships with a parent, it's pretty common to end up in a controlling romantic relationship or an abusive romantic relationship when you leave an abusive home dynamic. So it's not surprising to me, and it's not random to me that Louise ends up in this abusive situation. I'm like assuming it's abusive, but I still don't really like or get the point of Vernon being a conspiracy theorist about pedophilia. Like, was he a victim of pedophilia? It seems like no. What is he fighting against? What is he fighting for? If the point was just to show that she had left Joe but not into a really better situation, point taken. I just found I found the pedophilia of it all confused, as it often is. I mean, that's true of so many threads in this movie where I'm like, I'm not sure you made any kind of point about it, but you definitely mentioned something. You know, you definitely noticed something and then pointed at it. I don't know if you really said anything about it though. Yeah, but when Joe sees this, he kind of starts having like an asthma attack, and Dawn has to calm him down and like administer his inhaler. Dawn sucks, and that's it. That's the movie. Listen, it definitely wasn't bad. It definitely wasn't a bad movie. Like, I didn't think it was so stupid or anything, but I didn't love it, and I definitely didn't feel very emotionally connected or moved by it. Nothing in this movie really moved me. Nothing in this movie resonated super deeply. A lot resonated shallowly. Not bad, but not amazing either. I do think that the cinematography was pretty amazing. Like, if this is nominated for awards for cinematography, I'm not mad at that. I do think the cinematography was pretty awesome. I think it had really cool moments. I just kind of think it was a shit script, or at least it could have gone through a lot of edits and it could have had a lot more clarity. Like, ironically, the kind of like male ego and self-indulgence that Ari Aster is criticizing is also present in his work, where I feel like he doesn't really have self-restraint and he doesn't edit enough. And that works in something like The Naked Gun, which I haven't done a full episode on yet, but that works in The Naked Gun because the point is that it's kind of like just stupid and random, and a comedy sketch is often funniest when everyone yes ands and just like goes with the bullshit and the chaos of it all. And so when The Naked Gun does like an extended bit about a snowman animated to life who joins in a threesome with a couple and then is wronged and turns evil, that's fun because it's bizarre, absurd comedy. In a movie like Eddington, which has comedy but is mostly trying to take itself seriously as like a epic, as a western, as a drama, it doesn't work as well because you would rather feel deeply about one or two things happening than feel kind of something about so many things happening. And I have that same criticism about lots of male directors, about lots of action movies that I like, but I just wish they were kind of sharpened, pointed at something, and go deeper. I want to feel something. I want to care about it. Anora, like, so much crazy shit happens in Anora, but you are emotionally invested and you really care, and it's like stressful. I don't like the hand waving of like, see, everyone is kind of a hypocrite, everyone's kind of bad and extremism is bad, and I especially feel that a lot of people are not going to walk away understanding that it was not Antifa terrorists. And I've said this throughout the episode, but I also feel like a lot of the jokes were just edgy to be like, see, we don't have to be PC because we're being satirical. I find that annoying and stupid and like a waste of my time. Speaking of the cool camera work, there was an extended shot at the end of the movie that the whole widescreen was a sideways iPhone. And it was scrolling through social media and telling us basically what had happened with Brian over the past year. I really liked that. Like, I turned my head like that in the theater to watch it, and I just started smiling to myself because I was like, I like a movie making me physically react to it in this way and crane my neck in this uncomfortable position to try to hear this story. I thought that was cool. I think as people are trying to figure out how do we incorporate the inevitable reality of iPhones being part of everybody's existence all the time into film, this was an interesting answer to that. That was not ignoring them or making them somehow obsolete. And I think it's true that social media is confusing and distorting and makes you crane your neck at the world and takes you away from a stable, grounded view of reality. That's about all I have to say about Eddington. Like I said, if you like my podcast, please rate it and review it so people listen to it. That would be really nice. Send it to your friends, tell your friends. It's past midnight on a Monday, so now it's Tuesday. I've been recording since like 9:30. I don't know how this always happens. I think I have not much to talk about. I have like only a page of notes and then I just go on and on and on. And I guess that's why I need this outlet. Thanks for listening. Okay, bye.